2020, amidst confusion and chaos, lies and misinformation, the world took a second look at where we get our information. We looked at the media, we looked at our politicians, and we experienced a great awakening. It feels the exact same today in 2025. 2, I'm the wrong messenger. I'm definitely not the right guy. But it feels as though where we are is spiritual warfare. With Kevin Roberts, Dr. Kevin Roberts of Heritage. 3, the eternal debate. Not MJ versus LeBron, but Brady versus Belichick. With the author of a brand new book, Brady versus Belichick, the Dynasty Debate, Gary Myers. It is Will Cain Country, streaming live at the Will Cain Country YouTube channel, the Fox News Facebook page, terrestrial radio across this great United States of America, but always available by hitting follow on Spotify or Apple. Make sure if you're here, hanging out with us in the Willisha at the Will Cain Country YouTube channel, you hit subscribe, set the reminder, bookmark, and like so that we can count on you every Monday through Thursday right here at Will Cain Country. ABC, Matt Gutman, yesterday took to the reporter's microphone and shared with you the now revealed text messages between Charlie Kirk's alleged assassin and his transgender partner. This is how those messages were described on ABC.
We have seen an alleged murder with such specific text messages about the alleged murder weapon, where it was hidden, how it was placed, what was on it, but also it was very touching in a way that I think many of us didn't expect. A very intimate portrait into this relationship between the suspect's roommate and the suspect himself, with him repeatedly calling his roommate who is transitioning calling him my love, and I want to protect you, my love. So it was this duality of someone who the attorney said not only jeopardized the life of Charlie Kirk and the crowd, but was doing it in front of children, which is one of the aggravating circumstances of this case. And on the other hand, he was, speaking so lovingly about his partner. So a very interesting and, as Pierre said, riveting press conference.
Touching text exchanges in this virtual Romeo and Juliet story, a love story between an assassin and his trans lover. That's the takeaway from ABC. That's the takeaway from Matt Gutman. How did we get here? How long have we been here? Where do we go from here? Not to ABC. Story number 1. ABC's Matt Gutman has taken to social media to say the following. He said, yesterday, I tried to underscore the jarring contrast between this cold-blooded assassination of Charlie Kirk, a man who dedicated his life to public dialogue, and the personal, disturbing texts read aloud by the Utah County attorney at the press conference. I deeply regret that my words did not make that clear, but let there be zero doubt here. I unequivocally condemn this horrific crime and the pain it caused Charlie Kirk's family, those who were forced to witness it at UVU, and the millions of people that it inspired. Matt Gutman repeated that report on the touching love story between Tyler Robinson and his transgender roommate, not once but twice on ABC. I don't know what ideological prism, what mass psychosis, what indoctrination, what instinct led him to see not just the humanity, but the touching nature of the relationship between an assassin and his inspiration. I don't know what led not just Matt Gutman and not just ABC, but our media and information system at large to be so permanently, irredeemably broken. But I do know today, with that apology from Matt Gutman, there is a spiritual side of me that is forced to accept that apology. Let me tell you why. I don't know how to make sense of everything that's happening in the world. I don't know how to make sense of the fact that a good man doing good things to a great many was shot in the neck and murdered in cold blood for his self-professed beliefs. I don't know how to make sense of the chaos of people across this country celebrating what is an objective and easy to call evil. But I look up today and I see this happening across our world. In North Carolina, at a university, students there painted a mural on a rock. It's a red, white, and blue rock, 4 feet tall, 5 feet tall, with an image of Charlie Kirk and his words, which read, "If you believe in something, you need to have the courage to fight for those ideas, not run away from them and try to silence them." Charlie Kirk, 1993 to 2025. That rock, that mural, defaced by 19, 18, 20-year-old students at that North Carolina university. Video on social media shows young women with light blue paint in front of mourners, stepping in, forcing their way to the front, smearing light blue paint all over this tribute to Charlie Kirk. It's not just in North Carolina. Horrible, horrible scene at Texas State University yesterday, where a student, again at a vigil for Charlie Kirk, stood up, mocked the mourners, pantomimed the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Watch.
Charlie Kirk got hit in the neck. He's not real. He's not real. He's not real. Oh my God. Everybody has not because of my name is Charlie Kirk.
That student not once but twice standing up in front of the crowd, slapping his neck, seizing like he'd been shot and falling out in front of everyone, spitting there on the ground then in front of all these students mourning Charlie Kirk. And it's not just Charlie Kirk. How about a mural to Irina Zalutska, a young woman from Ukraine, the Ukrainian refugee, stabbed on a Charlotte light rail train. There, a mural was painted on a city embankment in Pensacola, Florida. Image of Irina Zalutska, Pensacola mourns you with a broken heart. Vandals took to that, painted flowers over her eyes, and spray painted, "Return to," I don't know, Ukraine, end something, oppression. Defacing the mural of Irina Zalutska. The point is, this is evil. This is easy. This is not a high bar. It's so easy to point out. This isn't even left-right. It's certainly not Republican-Democrat. It doesn't make sense in that frame. It cannot make sense in that frame unless we are simply in this world for partisan politics, if we're only Team Red and we're only Team Blue. But at this point, we have to be able to call what is a clear moral dilemma in this country. Are we capable of defining evil? Are we capable of pointing out evil? It is an objective evil to celebrate murder. And if we're incapable of doing that, if a great segment of our neighbors, of our teachers, of our nurses, of our public servants can't look at something so obvious as the celebration of murder as evil, then we are in the midst of a spiritual war. Man, am I the imperfect person to explore what I do believe to my very core is at the core of what is facing us in America. I don't want to be a televangelist. I can't be a televangelist. I don't satisfy any of the qualifications personally or doctrinally to lead someone in any examination of the Spirit. All I am is a human, just like you. And I don't know how we escape the reality that we are in the midst of a spiritual war. Does that mean Christian versus Muslim? Does that mean Jew versus Muslim? Does that mean simply good guys and bad guys? Certainly it does not mean Republican and Democrat. No, what it means is there is a devil on one of our shoulders, a demon that sits perhaps permanently on all of our shoulders, and an angel on the other. That there's a battle inside the soul of man that must be waged every day. I wage that battle with myself. I want to give in to anger. I want to seek vengeance. But it is the better angel. It is the grace of God. It is that morality that keeps me choosing not the demon, but the angel. But far too many people in America have given in to that demon. And don't just look at these instances. Look at the cultural rot and the slide in our country that comes always under the banner of tolerance and comes under the banner of empathy that we have accepted in lieu of moral clarity on right and wrong, moral clarity on good and evil. This spiritual war, this moral basis of not just the United States of America, but of Western civilization, an unfettered good in the history of humanity, was, I thought, laid out very well on Real Time with Bill Maher by the Daily Wire's Ben Shapiro.
Virtuous.
So, Bill, you and I agree on morality. I'd say like 87%.
Morality,
87.5.
but not from the Bible.
I have a question. Why?
Because it's for slavery. Because it's okay with slavery.
Why do you and I agree on morality like 87.5%? I'm a religious Jew. You're an atheist. Why do we agree on those things? I'll tell you. I mean, I can give you my answer.
Yeah, please.
Because we probably grew up a few miles from each other in a Western society that has several thousand years of biblical history behind it. And so you can think that you hit that triple and you formed your own morality, but the reality is you were born morally on third base.
No, okay. That's always such a silly argument.
You weren't capable of just simply accomplishing moral insight by virtue of your own superior intellect. You didn't accomplish that in one lifetime. You were handed a moral tradition over centuries. I don't know. I don't even know where I'm headed. I don't. I just know I'm trying to process this, maybe like you, and that I believe that where we're headed, and maybe where we've always been, is in the midst of a spiritual war. How does that lead us towards ABC talking about the touching nature of the text exchanges between an alleged assassin and his transgender lover? It happens because we've replaced, in many cases, religion with politics. We see the world through the frame of good guys and bad guys, but those good guys and bad guys simply wear a uniform of red and blue, and it really brings out the ugliest. No one has a monopoly, but there certainly is one strain that I believe right now has a market share. And it really reared its ugly head in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I give you a late-night comedy show. I give you Jimmy Kimmel.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
Jimmy Kimmel setting the propaganda early, saying that this was actually a MAGA shooter, that they've done anything they can to blame it on their political opponents, but the truth of the matter is that the shooter came from the world of MAGA. Where would he get that? Where would that bubble come from? Well, in part, it comes from the alternative to X. It comes from the oh-so-friendly confines of Blue Sky, where you saw things like this over the weekend. How about Jemele Hill, formerly of ESPN, now of vile, toxic bile, spilling out on almost a regular basis? She posted on Blue Sky, the LA Times spoke with an expert, imagine that, she put into parentheses, about the markings on the killer's bullet casings, and it turns out Charlie Kirk was likely the victim of a white supremacist gang hit. Charlie Kirk was the victim, I repeat, of a white supremacist gang hit. She attributes to experts who've examined the bullet markings that read, "Hey, fascist, catch." But Jemele Hill, despite her toxic and ugly nature, doesn't stand alone. She actually stands safely, as is always the case, in a crowd of liars. How about this? A professor and writer, Kevin Cruz, who posted as well. This on September 12th. It was an all-out call for war against, quote, them, when the right didn't know who they were. But now that it's clear that Kirk's assassin came from their world, they've shifted back to a meaningless thoughts and prayers, implying that Charlie Kirk, assassin, came from the right. Of course, that's not true. We now know, as laid out yesterday by the Utah County attorney, we've seen the evidence. We've heard the text messages. We've heard the reports from Tyler Robinson's family about the extreme leftward lurch he took over the past couple of years. We know the motivation. This was a politically motivated killing, not in the way where we find an insane person and backtrack into things they might have posted on X, as might be the case with the attacker of Paul Pelosi. No, but in this case, a normal person radicalized by political rhetoric and political leanings who does something of lunacy. This is clear. This is a political assassination. But that cannot be admitted to, because that destroys the framework of good guys and bad guys, team red, team blue, that is constantly espoused on, for example, CNN. Casey Hunt just refused to accept what stares her in the face.
What I am not happy about is that we have the shooter's words. We know what he put on the bullets. It's very, very clear what happened here. And there is a movement by some people to completely say, well, we have no idea.
Scott,
and we do.
Hold on. We have the floor. You can have the floor back. But here's the thing. I had to really struggle to understand all of the details that were on those bullets. They are internet memes from video games that people way younger than us play.
Is it, though? Says Casey Hunt on CNN. What is his motivation? Again, like Jemele Hill, she stands not alone. She stands in a crowd. Last night on CNN, Senator Ted Cruz appeared with Kaitlan Collins. This after the Utah County attorney doesn't just lay out allegations, but gives you supporting evidence as to what motivated Tyler Robinson. And this is the line from Kaitlan Collins.
You said a lot there, and we don't have a motive yet. We don't know yet. We're waiting. Obviously, we've heard what the governor's had to say, what the FBI director said today.
Come on, we don't have a motive yet.
We know.
We don't have a motive yet.
What's happening with?
Really, that's CNN's position.
I mean, from law enforcement,
he just happened
Senator.
to fire the gun in celebration. You can't tell the motive.
Senator.
She goes on. It went on for quite some time. I was actually watching this live. It was a horrible delay, and they cross-talked it, and I had to actually change the channel. I sympathize with you that watch and think, I can't pay attention to this. They're talking over one another. But she held the line. We don't know. Legally, she said, legally. You're hearing from the county prosecutor. You're being presented evidence. Oh, it's not proven beyond a reasonable doubt yet, not in a court of law. But you have the ability to add 2 and 2 together. You certainly do on other occasions. In fact, you have the ability to add 2 and 3 together and make it 4 when you want. We've seen that. In fact, we saw that over the weekend when you blamed it on MAGA. But now that it stares you in the face, you just simply can't. Instead, it becomes now, in its ultimate manifestation, a trans love story. A story of protection of a lover. Am I being silly? Does that sound odd? Well, guess what? That's exactly what was said by Montel Williams in the hour after Kaitlan Collins on that WWE slugfest that they pass off as enlightenment. Abby Phillips.
But hear it? I think he also, I don't believe he was motivated politically. I think this was motivated emotionally. I think this was a emotionally stunted person who literally, when I say it this way, just hear me, tried to defend his significant other, not trying to defend some ideology.
Although I do think there's clearly an ideological difference.
Montel Williams painting it as an emotional murder, protecting someone he saw, and I think his exact words were, who was disparaging his trans lover. Scott Jennings, to his credit, stood up and said, "What are we doing? It's staring you in the face. Everything is staring you in the face." The text, the bullets, the testimony of his mother, the testimony of his father, even the testimony of his roommate, the trans lover. In 2020, we had a great awakening. We had a great awakening about what was blatantly obvious. The black mark of lies all over media and institutions and politicians about what we needed to do. What was the cause? Wuhan lab, a pangolin. Whether or not we should shut down our schools for our children. That lie forced a great awakening. But while more are awake, the lie continues. It continues on trans issues. It continues on race. It continues on violence coming from the left. All we can hope now is that I believe, in part, there is going to be this great spiritual awakening, a spiritual analysis, an exploration, and a continuation of an awakening is who is the one that is keeping you in the dark. Let's continue this conversation with Dr. Kevin Roberts of Heritage when we come back on Will Cain Country. Make no mistake, those text exchanges, incredibly revealed by the Utah County Attorney, are incriminating. But there's also odd. Something's off in my mind about those text messages. It is Will Cain Country, streaming live at the Will Cain Country YouTube channel and the Fox News Facebook page. Make sure you set your reminder. Jump into the comments section. We want to bring you into the show, invite you into the Willisha. Let me just share with you for a moment some of these text exchanges. See if you can hear what I'm talking about. Here are some of the text exchanges that were sent between Tyler Robinson and his transgender roommate, lover. Tyler Robinson texted, "Drop what you're doing and look under my keyboard." Roommate, "What?" Multiple question marks. "You're joking, right?" "I'm still okay, my love," says Tyler Robinson, "but I'm stuck in Orem for a little while longer yet. Shouldn't be long till I can come home, but I got to go grab my rifle still. To be honest, I had hoped to keep this secret till I died of old age. I'm sorry to involve you." The roommate says, "You weren't the one who did it, right?" He says, "I'm sorry, I am." This text exchange goes on and on. I can share with you in more detail some of the things that were said, but it's long blocks of texts, full punctuation, full explanation of his motivations. When asked why, Tyler Robinson said, "I had enough of his hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out. If I'm able to grab my rifle unseen, I will have left no evidence. Going to attempt to retrieve it again. Hopefully, they have moved on. I haven't seen anything about them finding it." You ever seen a 22-year-old communicate so fully, with full punctuation, explaining his motivations, especially one that lived in Discord channels and spoke in memes? I text my 17-year-old, and I'm lucky to get back an okay, much less full-on conversations over text like this. I'm just telling you, that's weird. Something is off. Not that it absolves Tyler Robinson, but it sure does create a convenient alibi for anyone else potentially involved in this assassination. Dr. Kevin Roberts is the president of the Heritage Foundation. He's also the host of the Kevin Roberts Show, and he joins us now on Will Cain Country. What's up, Kevin?
Hey, man, always good to join you, even considering the circumstances. I just have to tell you, listening to that monologue, not that you need to hear it from me, but you're spot on. That text thread is just nuts. I think it probably, I mean, we don't know, but just speculating here, probably was designed to make sure the roommate partner, whatever he was and is, somehow would not be implicated. But there's a lot more to this story, as you were indicating, Will, than we know thus far.
Yeah, I don't have a conclusion, and I'm not doing the I'm just asking questions thing in order to sow conspiracy, but I just tell you, like, my job is also to use common sense, and this is just something off about this text exchange. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's all on the up and up. And again, it's not to say that he's not the assassin. It's just to say that it sure does create a convenient alibi, and it sure is an odd form of communication for a 22-year-old shit poster on Discord. So I think it's worthy of more journalistic questions as we move forward. You mentioned, Kevin, that you listened to my monologue, which I appreciate, and I'm sorting through something, man. And while we're talking, I invite you two-a-days. You can run some of this B-roll of what happened at Texas State or share with us the images of what happened at North Carolina. I'm just seeing this behavior, young people, professionals, and the way they've reacted to Charlie's murder. And, man, Kevin, I try to make sense. I really am. And I cannot escape. And I'm not here to be a preacher, and I'm not even sure I have clarity. But I just can't escape that there's something deep and spiritual that is going on in each and every one of us individually, but as a nation as a whole, and perhaps as a civilization as a whole, the West. There's something deep and spiritual going on that has forced or allowed people to lose sight of really easy bars and hurdles to clear, and that's the ability to discern good from evil.
Every time I think I'm emerging from my sorrow and anger about my friend Charlie Kirk's assassination, I see one of those clips, or one of my kids, the ages of, your 17-year-old, who are all fans of Charlie, will send one to me, and they both, the sorrow and the anger just sort of bubble back up. I mean, all of us at Heritage are feeling that. And then I take a step back, not even necessarily, Will, as the president of Heritage, as, a purported policy leader, but just as a dad, a husband, a regular guy. And I realize, oh man, I have seen this for 25 years. You will remember that I call myself a recovering academic. When I finished at the University of Texas, our shared alma mater, I was a young history professor at a public university in the Southwest. Most of my colleagues were good people. They were, sort of lunatics when it came to politics. But a few of them were really crazy when it came to understanding morality, when it came to understanding what they would call tolerance. And what has happened, to cut to the chase here, is that over a generation, that word tolerance has emerged into something that is totalitarian. That's a weird word to use for this assassin, Tyler Robinson, but he and his partner and all of those lunatics on that Discord network and the larger network of trans activists I've taken to calling trans-Tifa are lunatics. Their activity is demonic. And we have to ask the question, what happened in Tyler's life, but also, to your point, what have we done wrong as a society in America that has allowed this to happen? And the start of the answer to that question is that we have been preaching tolerance when we should have been preaching truth. To love our adversaries so much, which is our gospel commission, that we would be willing to speak truth to their face in charity, knowing that every human person is created equally in the eyes of God, but also to fight so much, as Charlie personified, that we're not going to give an inch. The time has come, my friend, to sum up here, that we must fight. I mean that obviously rhetorically, but we have to fight for this country, for truth, and for Charlie's legacy.
You're so right, and you're so right to invoke Charlie as the perfect avatar of this. We have done this thing, and it's happened over a matter of generations of to be distilled into "don't judge me, bro," and judgment became the most uncool thing that you could do to another. I'm a Gen Xer, and really the judgmental guy or the judgmental adult figure is the ultimate and uncool, and also unkind, painted as mean. When in truth, again, I think in the knowledge of the spiritual warfare, judgment is discernment, and discernment is health, and health is love. What I mean by that is you judge. Whether or not you want to admit it or not, you judge all day long. It's what we do. We judge what to eat and what not to eat, what smells rotten and what smells fresh. And we discern. And we have somehow decided that in the culture, we have a need to set aside discernment and judgment because they're seen as mean. And then that's extrapolated into hatred. And that's their accusations of everyone who they disagree with. They're full of hate. But the truth is, as Charlie would do, talk to someone and say to their face, hey, I think the path that you're going down is unhealthy. I think you should talk to someone about your mental health. I don't think you should pump your body full of drugs. And Charlie was not I'm not going to candy coat it. Charlie's put it bluntly and logically and aggressively, but he put it truthfully to their face. And I think we have to revisit, that actually is an act of love.
It's the greatest act of love. It's the greatest act of love to someone we are related to. By definition, we do love. It's the greatest act of love, as Charlie witnessed hundreds, if not a few thousand times, to strangers who were just filled with hatred for him. Evidenced tragically by what happened a week ago. And ultimately, the question that I get asked all the time, you certainly do, Will, is what can we do about this? And the first thing is what you've emphasized in today's show, and that is we have to have the courage, the discernment, as you say, to speak truth. That doesn't mean we need to be ugly. It certainly doesn't mean we're going to match the radical left's violence with violence from our side. What it does mean is we have to do a much better job than we have done the last generation during our respective lifetimes as Generation Xers in saying, forget this tolerance BS. Forget tolerance. That's not what the left meant by tolerance. All they meant by tolerance is they want to edge out those of us who actually understand what truth is. We're imperfect, obviously, we know that, but we got to summon the courage to convince people one by one that it is a sick, sick practice when a young man or a young woman comes to us and says, I want to be a different sex. And it's even worse, it's even more sick that thousands of physicians are willing to do that surgery. And it's even more sick that people defend that. And therefore, we get to the greatest sickness, which is that pastors, doctors, professors, teachers celebrate the assassination of a totally innocent, good man for doing what? For saying, I want to speak the truth, but I'm going to do so in a way in the greatest form of charity, which is to try to convince you logically that this path is bad for you. I'm just letting you know, Will, to tell you something you probably knew about Heritage already. We're done with this crap. Completely. If people thought that we were courageous, heroic, whatever it is, we just do our jobs here, the line is in the sand. We're going to honor the spirit of our fallen friend Charlie. And I can tell you that any policymaker in Washington, D.C. or state capitol who's standing in defense of transgender ideology is standing for nonsense. And we're here to bring the truth to them.
Well, here. That's great. That is great to hear. About Heritage. I'm so glad, by the way, that you invoked pastors. I've seen videos of pastors, really disturbing videos from pastors as well over the last couple of days. And then there is our politicians. And what will be fascinating to learn about Tyler Robinson is how soaked in the broader culture was Tyler Robinson? How led astray was he? How indoctrinated was he in what has become an all too common culture of existential threat? Fascist, Hitler, Nazi, bigot, racist. Everything is a threat to me. Everything is a threat to my own existence. And by the way, I don't want to avoid putting the tail on the donkey here. That's a big part of it, but there's a much bigger donkey, to continue that metaphor. This is a bigger issue than even trans. This is an issue of something more, culture-wide, that is embodied by these politicians that, in my mind, do own this. I'm not suggesting they're guilty of murder, but they own a culture. Everyone is just torn up about Charlie. But what everyone also understands and why it hits so home is this feels like something bigger than Charlie. And this bigger thing has been bubbling and brewing and easy to predict for quite some time. Still no less shocking. But Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, on and on. We're going to have to look at them calling things fascist in the same way we once did at people who advocated for slavery. That was said yesterday by Michael Malice on the show. That was a political movement that died. The support for slavery. This movement in its current form has to die. It has to be a thing that we look back upon as, wow, can you believe at one time one group of people believed X in America?
Precisely. There's no more compromising with the radical left. I'm still enough of an optimist to think that there might be some thoughtful people on the center left who are open to logic and reasoning, although that's what Charlie did. I mean, that was one of his many gifts from God, and it got him murdered, literally. But the key point is there's no more compromising with people like Schumer and AOC. I'm saying that I have to issue this caveat because the left, of course, loves to contort words, especially mine. And we don't mean that any way other than peacefully. That's precisely the point. But if we continue to go down this road and we have Republicans, we have conservatives, elected officials who engage in this nonsense about both sides, and they do that on news outlets that are not on our side, then that's precisely the kind of cowardice that got us to this point. I'm not suggesting that those men and women are responsible for what happened. I'm saying that they are certainly part of a problem, and that problem has been that men and women in elected office, especially in Washington, have looked the other way when it comes to how seriously radical the left has become, and sometimes so much so that the Washington establishment has looked snidely at organizations like Heritage that's been saying for years, transgender ideology is a problem. Radical leftism, that broader context, as you mentioned, is a problem. These aren't just competing alternative schools of thought. These are actually anti-human, and we ought to have the spine to stand up against them.
That's exactly right. That is so well said, Kevin. Yesterday, Michael Malice said to me, you know, there's a great segment of America that wants to and pines for the days of, you know, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill debating heavily during the day and playing golf together at night. And they think that's a place we can get back to in America. The problem with that concept is that is not the modern left. It simply isn't. And for them, if you want to play the tit-for-tat game and say it's not the modern right, well, you know, again, I remind people that Donald Trump is the president of tariffs. Remind me when that was a party platform of the right over the past half century. More open to gay marriage than any Republican politician in any of our lifetime. This is not a Republican Party that has moved to the right. This is actually a Republican Party that in many ways has moderated, at least in policy. And you can't play ball with someone who, at a minimum, considers you a bigot, at a medium considers you an authoritarian, and I'm not just talking about Donald Trump, all of us that we pine for authoritarianism, at a maximum an existential threat to their existence. They don't have a negotiating table that they want to come to. There is no compromise for them. This is deep radical ideology, to your point, Kevin.
The left has lost the argument. They lost every argument they engaged in with Charlie Kirk. And once one party, one side, loses an argument, and they don't have the humility, which the left doesn't possess, to have sort of a family meeting and the introspection to update its thinking, you know, evidenced by what Trump has done on the right, then all they have left is calls to violence. I mean, literal calls to violence. You know that as a public figure. I know that as a public figure. We know that every Monday afternoon at Heritage, not just with people, quote unquote, exercising free speech, but people who are vile and vulgar and can't engage in a conversation. But there's an even bigger problem here. The left over the last century has marched through almost every institution in American life because we let them. Almost every university, almost every school, almost every news outlet until the advent of Fox and shows like this. And we're beginning to gain some of that ground back. But the point is, we have to keep doing what we've been doing in reestablishing ground in those industries, and that is take ground from the left. No compromise. If, in fact, we are going to have some positive legacy from this tragedy a week ago, if we're going to have a legacy of the Trump-Vance administration in the long term, Will, it's going to be not just in politics and in policy, but that our spines have been steeled, that we recognize that no longer can you possess the American dream if you allow Marxists and totalitarians on the radical left to be in positions of power. Now is the time for every American to pray for sure. Please do that. To get your spiritual lives in order, to get your kids off screens, not allow them to be part of this ridiculous ideology, but it's really important that every single one of us enter the fray that is called politics, and never, ever, ever allow the radical left to win another election.
You brought up the institutional march of the left, including through the media. I'll play this again for you. I know that you've seen it. Most people have probably heard it. But this is yesterday on ABC. This is reporter Matt Gutman describing the text exchanges between Tyler Robinson and his trans lover.
We have seen an alleged murder with such specific text messages about the alleged murder weapon, where it was hidden, how it was placed, what was on it, but also it was very touching in a way that I think many of us didn't expect. A very intimate portrait into this relationship between the suspect's roommate and the suspect himself, with him repeatedly calling his roommate, who is transitioning calling him my love, and I want to protect you, my love. So it was this duality of someone who the attorney said not only jeopardized the life of Charlie Kirk and the crowd, but was doing it in front of children, which is one of the aggravating circumstances of this case. And on the other hand, he was, speaking so lovingly about his partner. So a very interesting and, as Pierre said, riveting press conference day.
So Matt Gutman, Kevin has apologized. Back to where I was a little bit earlier. I posted yesterday, fundamentally, irredeemably broken. Somebody did respond to me on social media, and they said, well, no person is irredeemable. That's the point of Christianity. And I appreciate the comment. And Matt Gutman has apologized today, and as a man, I accept that apology. It doesn't mean that I ignore it. I have really come to appreciate the concept of forgiveness but not forget. But when I say fundamentally irredeemably broken, Kevin, I'm more now talking about the institution. I don't know. There was a time in my career, we're well past it, but it was like, can these things be reformed? Could they hire me? Could they hire you? Could they hire more? And I think the answer is no, because I don't know how Matt Gutman got where he got yesterday. I don't know what instinct, what cute observation he thought that he had that was nuanced, or what ideological drive he maintained. I don't know where that came from. All I know is it came from somewhere deep and cultural, inside of ABC, inside of the media, and pervasive regardless of what three letters are on the microphone stand.
I think that's the key point. And look, I'm glad that he was man enough to apologize. I accept the apology. But I wish he were man enough to do what a real man would do. And I challenge him to do that today. And that is what every man should do. And that's publicly shame that text thread. Publicly shame parents and institutions who allow this to happen. You see, public shaming of what amounts to political sadism needs to come back into fashion. What I mean by that is the only way we're going to have institutional renewal is not merely by having governors courageously appointing new trustees to university boards. That's important. It isn't just going to be with the dismantling of the Department of Education, my hobby horse, as you know. That's even that insufficient, and that's huge. It's what each of us has to do, Will, to your point, and that is we have to stand up against what we know in our gut, we know in our hearts is wrong and grotesque, like that comment yesterday, and have the courage on social media and with our neighbors and our friends one by one to shame that which is grotesque and disgusting. If we start doing that as a country, paired with a real deepening spiritual life for each of us, then I remain very hopeful about America, which I know Charlie would want us to be.
Edinburgh, Texas, another mural of Charlie Kirk defaced. Vandalism says, I can't read the writing, but it's written over the face of Charlie Kirk. Yet another example of someone in need of shame. And I agree with that, Kevin, in that what we have seen in terms of people getting fired and so forth, what they had to say, these aren't free speech issues in my mind. And I laid this out yesterday. I believe not only in the First Amendment, but I believe in a culture of free speech. But that culture of free speech doesn't require tolerance to incivility. It doesn't require, put yourself in the position of any one of these employers. I don't want to employ someone who not only feels emboldened, but even harbors it in their heart. To be honest, who even harbors it in their heart to think the way they have in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination. And as Jesse Waters put it well last night, I don't want them fixing my car. I don't want them preparing my food. I don't want them riding next to me on the bus. If this is what hate inside of your heart, I don't want you around me. I don't want you around my kids. And I don't want you arrested unless you're inciting violence. And there's a couple of examples that I think are getting interesting, close to that from a legal standpoint. But I do want you shamed.
Absolutely. And what we have to realize is while there is a role for policy, there's a much bigger role that actually is upstream of policy, and those are the decisions that each of us make as individuals. And that's where, to your point, Will, to Jesse's point, we have to take that responsibility ourselves, that when we see that, when we hear that, we stop in our tracks and say, enough. This is ridiculous. That you're talking about these things a week after this great young man was assassinated. That's not what we tolerate in American society. And for the side of tolerance, how about we also start having some common sense? And ultimately what's going to happen, you know that I'm an optimist. That's my bias. I really do believe that a lot of Americans are so convicted by this tragedy, they absolutely want to do something. And the greatest thing that they can do, the easiest thing really that has great significance, they can do right now, this next minute, this next hour, is stand up and publicly shame the nonsense that's out there. If millions of Americans do that, and we develop this new cultural muscle memory, if you will, over months and years of doing so, that's how we take back this country.
All right. Kevin Roberts of Heritage, also the author or the host of The Kevin Roberts Show. I hope to see you soon, Kevin. I think I might, and I look forward to that day, and we'll check you out at Heritage. Thank you, Kevin.
God bless you, brother.
All right, take care. Over in the Willisha on YouTube, Big Caesar says, Will, it is spiritual warfare. Rick Allen, how can you hate Arena WTF? Really makes you think, doesn't it, Rick, about what the larger issue is at play? That maybe it's not just about policy or politics, and maybe there actually is something raging inside the soul of man, far too many men in America. Makes you think that it is, in fact, spiritual warfare. Scooby Nation says a Charlie Kirk mural was also defaced in Edinburgh, Texas, which we just showed you as well. SM Roundup says, CNN, shame on you. And then finally, Christine says, that is disgusting. They wouldn't be doing that if that was someone in their family. Charlie chose God, and so do people with a good heart and morals. Kevin Roberts says you stand up in shame. I also tell you bravely, proudly, stand up, pray, work on yourself and work on your family first, and then we work on us as a country in America. We lighten it up. What's the biggest debate in sports? Okay, it's probably MJ versus LeBron, but not far behind, it's Brady versus Belichick. Who is responsible for the dynasty? Gary Myers has written a whole book on it. So who does he say it is? Brady or Belichick? Next on Will Cain Country. Commercial break debate, just because I want to bring you into everything that we do here on the Will Cain Show. Apparently, some people behind the scenes at Fox really want to have the MJ versus LeBron debate with me, which, by the way, I don't want to have. Is there anything new to be said? It's all been said in the summer and at Christmas time on First Take. But in a little bit of a trolling mechanism, I said, look, if we're getting down to it, it goes MJ, Kareem, and then Dirk, just to make people mad. After it made people mad, I said, well, I just want to tell you that wherever I place Dirk, it's going to be much higher than you're willing to admit, and I will be right, because Dirk was transformative to the game in the same way of Steph Curry. There are two individuals in basketball that should be ranked higher than they ever will be because of their quiet personalities, and that is Dirk Nowitzki, and that is Tim Duncan. I'm not telling you they're 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't tell you what they are right now, but I'm just telling you they're much higher than you will admit.
And you said,
and I'm right.
And you said Kobe was overrated.
Will Cain Country streaming live at the Will Cain Country YouTube channel. I'll talk over two-a-days and the Fox News Facebook page on Spotify and on Apple. I'm not having the MJ versus LeBron debate, but I'm ready to have the Brady versus Belichick debate. Why? Because Gary Myers has a brand new book out. It's entitled Brady versus Belichick, The Dynasty Debate. And Gary Myers joins us now. Okay, Gary, come out hot. Guns a-blazing. Brady or Belichick?
Well, what do you think, Will? I mean, it was definitely Brady, and you have to read my entire book to find out how I break down the percentages. Because I think most people would commonly, say it was Brady over the course of 20 years, but it's not one-sided by any means, and there was highs and lows and ebbs and flows where one was more dominant than the other, but ultimately we had to make a decision because America wants to know.
All right. And then you say, Brady, how much of your decision, how much of your resolution to this debate is informed by what was done after their divorce? What Brady did in Tampa, what happened to Belichick in New England? In other words, one could argue that really shouldn't have bearing on the actual debate of the New England Patriots dynasty. It does, and we do factor that in. But it is interesting to think about. Had Brady gone to Tampa, fizzled out in the playoffs, Belichick somehow strung together one more Super Bowl, do you think the debate would have turned out differently? That you'd give the majority percentage to Belichick?
No, because I think what happened when they were apart, whether you're talking about Belichick's career coaching in Cleveland or the 13 games that Bledsoe started for him and was 5-13 before Brady took over, and then what happened with Brady going to Tampa and winning a Super Bowl and Bill getting fired after 4 years in New England after Brady left, completely, 100% irrelevant to the argument of who deserves the credit for what they accomplished together. Not everybody agrees with that, breaking it down like that, but, Brady going to Tampa, what does that have, what he accomplished there? What does that have to do with what happened in 2012 or 2007 in New England? I mean, he handpicked a team that was really talented, that needed a quarterback, other than Jameis Winston, who threw 30 interceptions the year before, and the Bucs still won 7 games. So clearly there was talent on that team. And Belichick's downfall was not having a successor in place to Brady. But again, that has nothing to do with the 20 years they were together.
Okay, then let's talk about how you arrived there. You do have some fascinating stories that you've shared in this book, and you have some fascinating testimony. One of the pieces that I found the most interesting is that of Joe Montana, who gives 75% of the San Francisco's Dynasty credit to Bill Walsh, not to himself. And in fact, really humbly says that essentially, not that he was replaceable, but that he was a bit like a robot executing a system designed by Bill Walsh. Now, that being said, Bill Walsh was an offensive coordinator, Bill Belichick a defensive coordinator. Bill Walsh would have been much more involved in the direct success of Joe Montana. But on the other hand, Gary, I've always thought of football as the most militaristic sport that we have. And I mean that as an analogy of top-down leadership of men executing their jobs. Soccer and basketball are fluid. Coaches can put into place tactics. They can kind of coach a little bit during the game, but it's largely up to the players on the field and their own decision-making in the moment. Football is literally the mantra of Bill Belichick. Do your job. Don't do more, and don't do the guys next to your job. Do your job. It doesn't just mean do enough to get your job done. It means don't freelance and try to do more. Get your job done. And because football is of that culture, and I'm not debating you, and I haven't said my answer yet, but I do think that bends the debate toward Belichick.
Well, I mean, it depends. Do you think the great quarterback is more important than the great coach? I mean, when you have them both and you have the greatest who ever did it at each of those two spots, then you're going to win an awful lot of championships. But if I had to choose between the two, I think you can win with a great quarterback and not a great coach. It's very hard to win with a great coach and an average quarterback. So that skews the argument, in my opinion, towards Brady. But that being said, Will, I mean, they clearly needed each other. I mean, Brady needed Belichick to draft him, because if he didn't, he might not have been drafted. As it was only like 30 picks after him that he could have been picked, and he probably wouldn't have been drafted at all. He kept him as a 4th-string quarterback when most teams, I can't think of any other team that keeps 4 quarterbacks on the active roster. And then, the following year, when Bledsoe got hurt and then he was ready to come back 2 months later, he stuck with Brady. So clearly, Belichick deserves an awful lot of credit, especially in the early years of what happened in New England. And one of the story is that the quarterback coach, Dick Rabine, was really responsible convincing Belichick to draft Brady. And he helped develop him his rookie year. Right before training camp, or right at the beginning of camp in 2001, Dick Rabine tragically passed away. He had heart issues. And Belichick did not hire another quarterback coach to replace Rabine. He took the job on himself. So he had a lot to do with Brady's development in those couple of years there where he didn't have a quarterback coach. He was the one that was, outside of Charlie Weiss, the offensive coordinator, Belichick was meeting with Brady every Tuesday night, going over the game plan and giving him the perspective of a defensive coordinator as a quarterback is looking at it on the defense, which was a huge advantage for Brady to learn the game from that point of view. So people use the recency bias, what we talked about before, about what happened after they parted and whether that should have any influence. I think while they're putting too much emphasis on that, they're not paying attention to what happened in the early years when Brady really needed Belichick.
You said something interesting. You said, okay, would you rather have a great quarterback and an average coach? We'll say average. Or would you rather have an average quarterback and a great coach? It's easy, not so easy, but I'm of decent football knowledge, and I want to do this with you, Gary. I've come up with coaches who have won with less than great quarterbacks. I mean, Bill Parcells won with Jeff Hostetler. We've got, the Ravens of the early 2000s.
Yeah,
we can come up with some
Dilfer.
examples of
Jordan Gruden won with Brad Johnson.
Correct, right. So we have some examples, right? And nothing against those quarterbacks, by the way. We just don't think of them in the great category that we do a Mahomes or a Brady.
Sure.
Do we have examples? And I'm just sitting here thinking through it. Do we have examples of great quarterbacks who won it all with what we can look back on as pretty average coaches?
Let me think about that one for a second. Well,
yeah, I'm thinking through it as well. I'm trying to.
I mean,
think
Brian Billick.
Where that best example?
Brian Billick was not a great coach, and he won it with an incredible defense. The Ravens' 2000 defense was amazing, and that's the team that had Trent Dilfer. I don't want to point out Brian is the worst of the Super Bowl winning coaches, because I almost have to look at the list. Obviously, Shula and Landry were all-time greats.
What about Green Bay? Green Bay and Brett Favre. What was that?
That was Mike Holmgren. He's a borderline Hall of Fame coach.
Yeah.
I mean, we can say Gruden.
Yeah, Kurt Warner.
Right? Well, that was Dick Vermeil.
Yeah. Yeah, my producers are rattling ones off of my ear, like Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy.
Mike
that
McCarthy,
might be the best
and,
example.
Was Bill? I mean, Bill Cowher's in the Hall of Fame. Is Mike Tomlin a great coach? He won one Super Bowl there, and with Roethlisberger. Right. What has Mike Tomlin done since then? Pete Carroll. Now, Pete Carroll is one of the handful of coaches that have won a Super Bowl and a national championship. But if Pete Carroll was a great coach, they would have beaten New England in that Super Bowl, because there's no way a great coach would have allowed Russell Wilson to throw that pass that Malcolm Butler intercepted instead of giving the ball to Marshawn Lynch. That was the worst call in the history of the world, at least in sports. So Pete was not a great coach. And again, I'd have to look at, I know I can find others for you, off the top of my head. Obviously Chuck Noll was a great coach. Tom Flores.
Oh, yeah, most people.
Tom Flores won 2 Super Bowls with really good teams, where people still considered Al Davis, even though he was the owner and not coaching, as the dominant, brains behind the operation of that one. So I put Tom Flores, and even though Tom Flores is in the Hall of Fame, I didn't necessarily think he was the Hall of Fame coach. Oh, and
talk about a few of the stories you have in the book. You talk about. Go ahead.
Well, can I just mention this one? Barry Switzer wins the Super Bowl with Jimmy Johnson's players, and Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin. Yep. I can easily make a case that Switzer might have been a really good coach in college. He was not a great NFL coach.
Yeah, that's a great example. A couple of stories you share in the book about Belichick and then Belichick's relationship with Brady. You point out that Tom Brady Sr., Tom's dad, really is the one that has spoken candidly about the tense relationship between Brady and Belichick. What was said by Tom Brady Sr.?
Well, he thought Belichick's attitude towards his son was always one of expectation rather than appreciation. Whether it was at the time that Tom was establishing himself as one of the best quarterbacks in the league, or even towards the end of the time in New England when Tom had established himself as the best quarterback in NFL history, that Belichick never changed the way he treated Tom. And early on, Tom embraced being coached hard by Belichick. I mean, he really liked it. And I think that had a lot to do with Brady's development. But at a certain point, and Belichick's, the reasoning for that is because he felt if he can criticize Brady, who had accomplished so much, and Tom had thick skin and wasn't complaining about it, then Belichick can basically coach anybody hard on that team, and nobody had a right to complain because Tom Brady's not complaining. How can you complain? But they reached a point, it might have been after they won their fourth Super Bowl together, and that was the Seattle game, where Tom just thought, enough. Go pick on somebody else. I've won you 4 championships. I think I deserve a little bit of the benefit of the doubt here. Lay off, buddy. We won 35-7. You don't have to pick on the interception that I just threw that was meaningless. But Belichick only knew one way how to do it. And I would think that would wear anybody out.
You say that Roger Goodell came to regret not suspending Belichick over Spygate, and it's all about an apology.
Yeah, I mean, I remember this specifically. It was a Thursday night that Goodell handed out the punishment for Spygate. It was a $500,000 fine to Belichick, $250 to the Patriots, and it took away a first-round draft choice. But behind the scenes, he had extracted a promise from Belichick that at his press conference the next morning, he would apologize for breaking the NFL rules. Belichick gets up at his press conference and apologizes to the Kraft family and to his players and to Patriot fans. No apology whatsoever for breaking the rules. And as he was being peppered with questions at the press conference, that was, we're on to San Diego, because they were playing the Chargers 2 days later. He repeated that, we're on to San Diego. Well, I talked to Goodell about a week or two later, and I said, Roger, I'm really surprised you didn't suspend him. I mean, this wasn't like a one-shot deal. This has been going on for 8 years. You just happened to catch him now. And he said, I really regret not suspending him, maybe not for the reasons that you're saying, but because part of the deal was he was going to apologize for what he did. And Goodell felt betrayed by Belichick in that instance, and again, really regretted not really, bringing down the hammer on him at that time.
All right, then finally, you do tell a story, and it's something that was well litigated, I feel like, on Sports Talk. I certainly feel like I was a part of these conversations. Mm-hmm. And that is when Brady had the MAGA hat in his locker. Subsequently, Kraft was a big supporter of Donald Trump. And ultimately, Bill Belichick was to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And I think that what you've highlighted here is there was a lot of division, obviously, probably in retrospect, and at the time we knew, in the locker room. But what? No one ever challenged Belichick or Brady or Kraft?
Well, I think when I remember Tom having the red MAGA hat on the shelf in his locker, which was extremely visible, and it was given to him by Kraft. All three of them had a relationship with Trump that had nothing to do with the other. I mean, Tom got to know Trump early in his career because after he won his first Super Bowl, Trump asked him to be a judge at, I don't remember, was it Miss Universe or Miss America, that contest that he owned it. So Brady, being a 24-year-old guy, is asked to judge a beauty pageant. Well, yeah, I'll do that. And then they played golf together. So they developed a friendship, but it wasn't based on politics. It was just because Trump was always nice to him. And so when Kraft gives him the MAGA hat, and he gets a lot of pushback in the locker room and the media, and from one day to the next, the hat was gone and never seen it again. And Tom is not outwardly a political guy. And to this day, he's never said whether he voted for Trump either time. But when he realized that he couldn't split the locker room because of any perception about affiliation with Trump, he got rid of that hat. Kraft, who is a lifelong Democrat in the bluest of blue states, he had a relationship with Trump, but it really changed in 2011 when Kraft's wife passed away. And he said that Trump was one of the few guys, one of his few friends who constantly reached out to him to ask him to do things during what Kraft has, described as the darkest period in his life. And he always remembered Trump for that period of time. And he made the largest contribution to Trump's first inauguration ball, the party that night. And he stuck with him, even though he was a lifelong Democrat, until January 6th. And I don't know that they've spoken since then, that Kraft was just completely disgusted by what happened. And then as far as Belichick is concerned, he wrote that letter that Trump read the night before the first election in 2016, the Belichick's letter of support. And when he was going to get the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2021, right as Trump was leaving, it was right when he was leaving office, I believe. And then January 6th happened, and Belichick decided not to accept it. Well, the players in the locker room didn't know at that point that he wasn't going to accept it. And Devin McCourty, who was a leader of that team and was very hesitant, he was a captain for 12 of his 13 years. He was very hesitant to ever talk to Belichick about anything. I mean, players just were somewhat intimidated by him. And their season was over. They had lost a playoff game a couple days before, but McCourty called Belichick and said, "You are going to lose this locker room if you accept that award." And Belichick said, "Don't worry about it. I already decided and have informed the president I'm not coming to Washington to get it." And that did a lot for Belichick standing in the locker room. Not that they were telling him you couldn't support Trump or whatever. They just said it was such a bad look and such a bad reflection on the team if he went and accepted that award after what had happened at the Capitol. And there were players like McCourty who really resented the Patriots being known as Trump's team because of the relationship with the quarterback, the owner, and the coach all had with him that were, relationships that were well known.
Interesting stories. They're all there. Be interesting to find out, by the way, if Robert Kraft has spoken to Donald Trump in the past 4 or 5 years. It's all laid out in Brady versus Belichick, the Dynasty debate. It's by Gary Myers, and we appreciate you hanging out and sharing some of the stories with us today, Gary. Thank you.
Hey, Will, thanks so much for having me on.
Okay, take care. Brady versus Belichick, the Dynasty debate. Okay, that's going to do it for us today here on Will Cain Country, Monday through Thursday at the YouTube channel. Again, share it with your friends. Hit subscribe. Jump into the comments. Come on. Come hang out in the country. See you next time.